Mrs. Shirley Yount.
Well, Dr. Hare, you know, we go back a long way. You came here in 52, and I came in 57, so I'm one of the older ones that they talk about. You know? It was a lot different, as we talked about. The clinic at that time was very small. The hospital was small. We had a basement and 2 floors. We had ward beds. We had a emergency room that was 1 room in the basement, and we had the cafeteria that was next to it. So if you had an emergency come in, it was lunchtime, a little different, you know. We had a very small lab in the basement, and the pharmacy was like a closet. You go in to get your medicines, you know, and you could just enough room for 1 person in there, and we ordered medicines from the drugstore. We didn't have the big fancy stuff that we have now. So long ago, it was quite different than what we have now. One of the things that I remember about him, and Janice took part of that, was that he was known as the Southern Gentleman. That was his title, really. I don't know how much he realized that, but he was. He was a person that he would come in and sit down at the bedside, listen to what the patient had to say, take a history, and examine the patient. He took time for the patient. That's a little different from the way our world is today. But that was one of the things that I really remember about him. I think really, when I think back, he was probably what we call the only cardiologist at that time. Internist, however you would want to put his title. But he was very important to us. And one of the things that I remember, we'll get into the 70s now, when coronary units were just coming in. You know, they were a very important thing for the hospitals, and I think he played a major part in getting our coronary unit that we had here. Now, when that happened, it was very much necessary for the nurses to have classes in coronary care. We didn't get that in nurses training at that time in the 50s, and a lot of the nurses at that time were 3-year grads and did not have that education that we needed. So it was very, very important that the doctors give us education. And so I remember it was in the 70s, I think, September, somewhere in that area, and we had classes in what was, I believe, the basement of Trinity. And a lot of the doctors participated in that. There were several of them: Dr. Hare, Rucker, Dr. Graves, I think Dr. Howard Jackson, Dr. Pratt. Each gave classes for the nurses. And one of the things that Dr. Hare gave was the monitoring system and a lot of the rhythms and things that we dealt with. And one of the things that I remembered, he was teaching us the 12-lead EKG monitoring equipment and the different rhythms that we would have to go through. And he said, one thing you've got to remember, you know, you can't depend on this machine. You got to go in and take a look at the patient, because you could see a rhythm on that monitor, and well, you know, it would be different. And if you go in and look, maybe it was just an electrode off, nothing very, you know, important, but then there could be a lot of things different too, where it was necessary to really evaluate what was going on in that patient. Now, when we started out, we only had 5 beds, and we were up on 4th floor. And one of the things I do remember, though, we had the 5 beds, and Nancy Seeley and Rosemary Jessup were probably the only 2 RNs that really had the education that was needed. So they did a lot at the beginning of our unit. But one of the things that I remember, and I'm not sure For some reason, I believe that you were the doctor taking care of the patient, but I'm not positive. So if somebody, can correct me after this is over. But anyway, we had a patient that we had to code in our unit, and it was bed 4. And it was a successful code, and we were very glad that happened that way, but naturally we always are. But one of the things that happened was the patient said, I saw everything you all were doing. And we thought, oh, it's medication talking. That can't be true. Well, we just went on, and a little while later, Lois Reed, one of the nurses over on 4th floor, came through, and she said, anybody see my pen? I dropped it when we were doing that code. The man looked there, and he says, it's over there under the bed. So he really made a believer out of it. Now, we had lots of doctors in there, but I'm thinking that was one of your patients. But that it was an interesting time. A lot of things have changed, as I said, and we've gone from a 5-bed unit to a 10-bed unit. We've gone from a small hospital to a lot of different additions onto the hospital, and now we're going to the big new hospital. We as a small town have really come a long way, and I think you're going to hear a lot of things about the new big hospital, and you're going to hear things all over the world, all over the place about it. But we've really got a lot to be proud of. We really do, and how much progress that we have made in Madison, Indiana. And this man's played a big part, a major part in this. I have one more thing that I remember, and I'm not sure who has the green thumb in your family, whether it's you or whether it's Marge. But I could always remember there were times that you brought in bouquets of flowers out of the garden. And was it him? Is he the green thumb? Well, we really appreciated it. We would end up with a bouquet of flowers on the desk, and that always helped out when you were in the medical profession. It was always great. But Dr. Hare, I'm just awful glad you decided